TalkNShop Network makes no apologies for what you're about to hear. The host might, though. It's the $9 Podcast with Drewski. Because moderating for Pro Wrestling's Good Brothers wasn't enough work. Talking wrestling and more. Weekly on all major podcast networks.
Hello there. Those of you tuning in for the first time are wondering, who the hell is this? I am Drewski. I am the moderator of the TalkNShop Patreon and the chat known as the Falcon's Nest. About 6 months ago, Machine Gun Carl Anderson had a interesting idea. What if I made a podcast network comprised of people that are patrons of the Patreon? You know, I have the network. I have the network to support them. You know, give them the platform to do whatever they see fit. Because I want to sort of give back. I like making people in the nest stars in a way, for lack of a better term. And you know, there's a thing in the comic book industry where it's like every issue is somebody's first issue. To that end, this may be your first time hearing me. But this, technically, this is the 40th podcast I've done since I started. I've been doing this weekly, getting progressively better at it every week. So I'm the first to admit that I'm not exactly the greatest. I'm not exactly an orator, and it shows sometimes. If you go back and look at the first 10 or so episodes I do, it's pretty much like deer in the headlights crap. And always a work in progress. I basically started to learn how to edit in only the past 5 episodes or so. So I'm at the point where things are they've evolved from a train wreck to barely adequate. And to that end, the Machine Gun has decided to use the TalkNShop Network platform to give the podcasts on the Patreon airtime for the masses. So anything you don't like, it's their fault. Unfortunately. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending. It's like you'll notice that there's a lot of variety involved. You've met the Grunt Gang for the past couple of weeks, and Bump and Feed with Emerson. Judging from the comments, it's exactly what I expected for people who are not used to it. There's a certain brand of humor that comes from being part of the TalkNShop Patreon, and it's acquired taste, especially if you don't know about it. There will be a lot of insider terms that's going to go over a lot of people's heads. And you can only hope that they stick with it, and not dismiss it outright. And stay tuned to listen. If they like it, and subscribe. Like and subscribe. That's all the better. And support the people doing these things, because they're doing they're donating their free time basically to put these podcasts out. They're not really making money doing this stuff. You can argue that you don't really need to go need to make money to do this stuff if it's what you love. But it don't hurt. I mean, I'm no different. It's like most of the Falcons Nest podcasts have their own like merch stores set up on their own. It's basically it's a whole lot of DIY stuff going on, so it's a whole lot of work. Like I will keep reiterating, it's a work in progress all around on because it's early days. I'm no different. There's mine. And as an introduction, I am technically the oldest member of the Patreon. I have an AARP card that's it's sitting in my wallet that pretty much qualifies me to make that statement. I like to joke that this podcast is tailored to the old man yells at clouds demographic. As in terms of my takes aren't exactly the best, not exactly the worst. It's just they're my takes. I'm wrong more often than I'm right, but that's life. I can only go through what I see because I've been watching wrestling through through the lens of a fan since like the 1970s. Yeah, I'm 59, right? And to really narrow down how long I've been watching this stuff, I went to WrestleMania 1, and which was a closed circuit at the time. Went to because I live in San Diego, California, well, the outskirts of San Diego, California, and WrestleMania 1, what was known back then as San Diego Sports Arena, which is still standing, surprisingly enough. They had, they were the closed circuit outlet for WrestleMania 1. The crowds back then, compared to now, way more rowdy. If you were a big fan of cigar smoke, you would have loved WrestleMania 1. It's like, and it went from there. It was a combination of that and discovering World Championship Wrestling in 1985. When I was a senior in high school. It would just happen to coincide with the rise of the Four Horsemen in Crockett Promotions. What really sold me was the angle they did with the Four Horsemen that broke Dusty's arm in the studio parking lot with axe handles. From then on, it's like, okay, I'm hooked for life. And ever since then, it's been a roller coaster. I've seen highs, I've seen lows, I've seen years of mascots, I've seen years of silly wrestling, years of serious wrestling, years of what the hell wrestling. As I've gotten older, my tastes have expanded. I'll be the first to admit there's holes in my game in terms of wrestling, wrestling knowledge. So I'm not really well versed on certain promotions, or I wish I was more knowledgeable about the lucha scene. But I've seen stuff from like AAA and CMLL in the past, and the CMLL is on a run right now that is very impressive. And I wish I could. I was alive during the time of the four pillars of All Japan, but I never got to see that. And it's one of the beauties of YouTube is you can catch up on what you've missed. And especially the biggest thing I regret is not watching All Japan Women's Wrestling in the 90s. Because back then, you know, they're doing moves now. The wrestling community, it's in 2026 is still trying to catch up on. It's been said that 90% of the moves you see, you see in today's pro wrestling was originated by the Japanese women back in the day. Particularly Manomi Toyota. If you've ever seen one of her matches, you'll be immediately hooked because she does stuff in the ring. Did stuff in the ring that was like decades ahead of her time. But there's an urgency to her stuff that made it look like made it look like a struggle every time. It was a razor thin margin of like failure to success. It's taking chances. I love when wrestling takes chances. I love when wrestling takes chances and that pay off handsomely. Was I a fan of the Monday Night Wars? At the time, yeah. It was like when the rise of computer like message boards and stuff were talking excitedly about which wrestlers jump into where. It was a heady time. It was like the message boards back in the 90s would make the social media today look like a joke in terms of like inflammatory statements. Yeah, it'd be a lot of people canceled in this generation, to put it mildly. Grew up watching ECW. That was a good thing about in San Diego. Cable had just started, like in the early 80s, mid 80s. And around that time, ESPN would run it on daily in the mornings. It was like it was a block of wrestling. It would be like old episodes of AWA. You see Nick Bockwinkel and young Kurt Hennig, Larry the Axe Hennig, and the Young Rockers with Sean and Marty. Young DDP. Yeah, DDP was in the AWA way back in the day, and that would be followed up by World Class Championship Wrestling with the Von Erichs. Old episodes, you'd actually see like Stone Cold, who became Stone Cold. You'd see like Steve Austin's like first matches in World Class against his trainer, gentleman Chris Adams. You learn about guys like Iceman King Parsons, one of the more underrated heels ever. Where some of his catchphrases and mannerisms would be adopted years later by one Rocky Maivia. If you know, you know. It's one of the first promotion I saw a young Sid Vicious. It was like a tryout. It was technically a tryout match against, again, gentleman Chris Adams. It's like the first time you see Sid, it's like, holy crap, right? Like, I can remember days like in WCW was just starting out. You'd see young young Mark Callis. Yeah, Mark Callis and Dangerous Dan Spivey. Mark Callis, before he became The Undertaker in WWF, you'd see Jean-Paul Levesque as one of the Blue Bloods with David Taylor and Lord Steven Regal. before he jumped ship to become the cerebral assassin, the King of Kings, yada yada yada. And even Edge, you know, you see young Edge, young Cactus Jack, Cactus Jack and Vader. You grow up on all these different matches. Like if you're a tag team fan, like in the early '80s in Crockett, between Crockett and WWE, it was a time. That was when WWE gave a damn about tag teams. At one point they were like 8 or 9. They had a tag division that was like 8 or 9 teams deep, with the Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation and Beefcake and Valentine and IRS and Money Incorporated. I mean, sorry, to name a few. And then you had the teams like Strike Force and the Wild Samoans. Nobody really talks about the Wild Samoans anymore, which is a shame. They would scare, they were holdovers from the '70s. It scared the hell out of people wherever they went. And you had the Islanders, which with a young most dangerous man in the business, most dangerous man in wrestling history, Haku, slash Ming, also known as father of one Crystal Tamatonga and Tongaloa and Hikaleo. You'd have the Russians. Ivan Koloff, the mainstay in the '50s and '50s, '60s, and '70s, and his quote unquote nephew Nikita Koloff. Nikita Koloff, if you've never seen Nikita Koloff matches, he was Goldberg before Goldberg. Trust me on this. Same vibe. So every time you got in the ring, it's like you had to see him. He was an experience. But you'd see guys like Dirty Dick Slater and Dick Murdoch, and grew up on that stuff. Like Wahoo McDaniel was still around, and Tully Blanchard. You had Tully Blanchard and the Fantastics and the Midnight Express, both versions of the Midnight Express. The Freebirds, and it was a time. The tag team, it was a time. I was during the time when like kayfabe was strong, and the times when Bobby the Brain Heenan would talk about it in his biography, which I recommend highly. He would have to park his car about several blocks away from like the venue, because otherwise his tires would get slashed. There'd be incidences of people like bringing guns to shows, and because kayfabe was so strong, compared that to now, it's like audience reactions are kind of tamed compared to back then a bit, but they're still strong. They're still strong, right? Yeah. And it has to do with and it has to do with basically the rise of social media. Because if a lot of stuff wrestlers did in the '70s and early '80s, even in the '90s, if social media had been around in the proliferation as it is today, the whole industry would be canceled. It was a different time. It was, how do you say it's a different time? It was a different time. Leave it like that. It's changed for the better in many aspects. And that is a good thing, because evolution, right? Business needs to evolve. It has to evolve. But then you have the the constant of every generation of hating the generation coming, the new generation of stuff. There was a time where people were, all the old heads were criticizing one Harley Race for doing moves off the top rope, saying he was going to kill the business doing top rope moves. It's fast forward that to the 2000s, to today, and it's variations of the same argument. It's like, you can't stop progress. No matter how much no matter how much you want to hold on to the old ways, it's basically adapt. You have to adapt, right? And the news coming out about WWE using AI is a new wrinkle on this. But when you think about it, it's not really that much different than you putting in a wrestling game and putting in putting it in a GM mode, and the game's AI is basically laying out scenarios that you're playing. It's only on a larger scale. But you can also say it's a cost-cutting move. Don't have to really pay writers that way. Have a writing staff. To have a writing staff for wrestling in the first place, on its surface, it's kind of silly. It's all a matter of philosophies after all. You have WWE, going to great lengths to distance themselves from calling themselves a wrestling company by branding themselves as sports entertainment. And sort of like going down the road of poo-pooing or going to great lengths to not refer to it as wrestling at all. And what technology is advancing faster than a lot of people always advances faster than a lot of people can grasp, in a sense. It's not just WWE. It's like everywhere else. It's like AI is starting to permeate pretty much everything. You hear a discourse about AI is going to take over jobs in and of itself. I've heard it mentioned a time or two about replacing what I do for a living, my shoe job, and I'll believe it when I see it. But they're already testing stuff like that in Japan. It's like because full disclosure, I work at a convenience store. I have for 37 years plus. It doesn't devalue my opinion in anything just because I'm a civilian, right? I'm still a paying fan at the end of the day. See what they're doing. I've heard them trying. They're going to eliminate, basically make what I do, obsolete within like 5 to 10 years. I've been hearing that for the past 20. So who's to say? It's like people have been calling for the death of wrestling since the 1950s, for crying out loud. It's not the government. It's like it's like local state commissions. It's nothing new. It's like you have to remember the sport's been around for almost 100-something years now, as it's evolved from being the purview of a circus sideshow type of thing. the carny aspects of that are still there, but the basic framework is the same. And it's it's an interesting it's also an interesting peek at the future, pretty much, because I remember most of the old guard in WWE is aging their way out, and there's bound to be turnover up above. And you have new voices coming in, and new voices coming in have different mindsets, different philosophies. They don't really subscribe to the old school ways. So you're going to see a sea change in terms of philosophies about booking in the next 5 to 10 years or so, for good or bad. There should be more chances taken, and I wonder what it will look like in 10 years, because again, a lot of the talent is aging out. The talent is aging out at pretty much the same time too. WWE in particular has a lot of talent that are either on their last run or they're about to go on their last run. And it's going to leave a vacuum. And you'd like to think that they have like young talent ready to go, but they do. But some of them are a little, some of the call-ups from NXT are a little older than they would like to be. As big a fan of like All Ego Ethan Page as I am, because I've known Julian, shoot name, for years since he teamed in the North with Josh Alexander, and he's in his early 30s. He might be the future top heel on the main roster, because he has pretty much the whole package. He plays smarmy really, really well. Obafemi, Obafemi is legit, and hopefully they don't drop the ball on him, because it's set up for it's pretty much a home run if they just get out of their own way. It's the one thing about WWE. It's like, I reckon, especially with the TKO ownership, I liken it to like a sports franchise when you have like a owner who has no experience, like a day-to-day, trying to enforce his will on like play calling for for the team he owns, and it becomes like a power struggle. Power struggle between like ownership and the people he's trusted to hire, trusted to implement their philosophies. Because I look at how they've booked Cody. Cody refers to himself as quarterback number one. It's hard to be quarterback number one when ownership is dictating, is trying to call plays from up high that run counter to what his coaches and his GM and his coach and his offensive coordinator, which would be the booking committee, which would be Hunter and Hunter and the writers, their game plan. But you see it in every sport, pretty much, and it never ends well, right? You're not giving quarterback one the best opportunity to succeed in that fashion, right? You're not putting him in a position to succeed, and that is a detriment to the organization in the long run, and it leads to discord, and it leads to disagreements, and it leads to acrimony all around up, and it also leads to firings. You've seen it before, and I've seen it before in football, seen it in baseball, seen it in basketball, and you shouldn't be surprised that it happens in wrestling. Yeah. So basically, quarterback one can only call the play, only run the plays that are called, right? He can voice his opinion about it, but it's not his call. He has to abide by the coaches, right? So it's, and I hate to use that sports analogy, but that's the way I see it. Whether or not things improve, it's hard to say. It's very hard to say. I feel bad for they have talent out still. They've made cuts, the annual post WrestleMania cuts, and you hear noises about Aleister Black and Zelina Vega, two great people, who were let go, and you can speculate all you want why. It's just I'd rather wait and sit, instead of blindly following the social media thing, as I've been accused of in the past by some members of the Falcons Nest. That's why they saddled me with the nickname Timu Meltzer. It's a little inside joke. That's the one thing about the Falcons Nest. A prerequisite is ball busting, and ball busting is in abundance in the nest. So you learn to live with that. It'd be interesting to see where they go. Will they go to TNA? Well, considering TNA loves the supernatural, as they've shown with the return of the return of the Shadow Realm and the return of Demon and Bunny. Now, full disclosure, there's a little bit of personal bias here because I've known both Rosemary and Allie for almost as long as I've known almost as long as I've known the Hoots, and I support those people. I support both of them immensely because they've been nothing. They're nothing but kind to me every time I've been with them. Every time I've met them, and they put up with me. They've put up with me. They've put up with me for years, to put it mildly. It's nothing untoward, but I consider them friends. I don't have many, but the nest knows a couple of the friends, and again, more ball busting. I'm not gonna bring up the other friends because I don't need months of serious ball busting coming up. But it's considering what the Bunny, Cherry Bomb's been through the past couple of years, because her last two matches in AEW, she got seriously hurt. I think her last match she broke her orbital bone. It took her a long time to heal, and she just got cleared about a couple months ago because of it, and she's got the itch to start training again, and here we are. And that was good for her. It's she needs it. She needs it for her. And I said, I'll support them regardless because, again, good people. As far as the boys, who we refer to as the Hoots, referred to Machine Gun and one Luke Doc Gallows, him with the 30 different gimmicks. The boys are in Japan right now, basically going through the Noah roster, like a buzzsaw. Basically, they've only been there for about a week or so, and they've basically beat the crap out of almost the entire roster. They have like a big match coming up tomorrow, as I tape this, between like two of the big legends of pro wrestling Noah, Kano and Marufuji. Yeah, it's been the boys have been positioned that they may be future GHC tag team champions, which would add to their resume. Add to their historic resume, and which would be immense, because it's a good accolade to have, like, because Noah is historically a very prestigious organization. After their run in, because there are 2 weeks in Japan, then they're back home for a day, and then they fly back out east, or back out west. Yeah, I need a compass for direction. For a week in Australia. For a week in Australia. And they're going to be touring with Killer Cross and Scarlet and Shotzi Blackheart, which will be very fun because those are fun people too. And after that, they fly back for like a couple days, maybe a week. Then back to Noah for 3 weeks in Japan for a longer run. So their dance card is full until July. It's been, the frequent flyer miles are like ridiculous. As soon as Delta figures out how not to put Machine Gun's luggage in a spin cycle every time he flies, everything will be nice and rosy. And it's good that the guys are having a good time. They've basically run through every steakhouse in Japan already, including Ribera, where the Machine Gun picked up his 19th, not a typo, 19th Ribera jacket. Every time I hear a number of Ribera jackets he has, I have to laugh, because I remember a couple of years ago, one Matt Cardona got on Twitter, got on social media, and was bragging that he had just gotten his 9th. To which I replied to him, well, Machine Gun has 13. It pretty much shut down his whole rant. It was one of the few times a little bit of snark helped on things. Speaking of snark, it's like I could talk crap about what I refer to jokingly as the Falcon's Nest main event, which is every time Rocky Romero, who's the silent partner, alleged ex-silent partner of the TalkNShop empire, every time he gets involved in a match and gets basically buried or basically wrecked, be it on Collision, be it on Ring of Honor, be it on Dynamite, that's his job now. It wasn't enough to be in the top one of the top 5 most powerful people behind the scenes in wrestling, stemming from its humble origins, keeping the Good Brothers under 30 minutes in the Tokyo Dome doing podcasts. Um, he and Trent Beretta for Punky Vice had a match against Cage and Cope. If who people know as more as Edge and Christian. Now, if you had told me 10 years ago that this match was actually going to be a match that was going to happen somewhere, I would have called you crazy. That's how the landscape changes. Yeah, that's how the landscape changes. You'll see dream matches like that pop out of nowhere. It's like, I love what they're doing with. I love what they're doing with MJF. The storytelling with MJF is that MJF's worst enemy. It's MJF. Being a heel and cheating for so long, he gets shocked when people do his tactics to him. He has no idea how to react. That's a good thing to. It's a good thing to. It's a good thing to build on in the future. Another thing they can build on in the future is what they're doing with Will Ospreay. The way it's set up right now, it's like Ospreay has 3 different factions wondering what his deal is. Between his friends in the United Empire in Japan, is some apparently newfound friends in the Death Riders. Imagine saying that sentence a year ago. Again, how things change. And now the Ops with Samoa Joe. With Samoa Joe's return. And they're all fighting for the soul of Will Ospreay. It's a very interesting dynamic that they're playing with, especially coming up on Forbidden Doors coming soon. They've been slowly building it up in the background, especially in New Japan. New Japan's really been playing up that they really hate AEW. So this will be the first Forbidden Door where it actually feels they can play off the animosity in a way, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Darby's insane. Well, everybody, Darby Allin, I know water is wet. Darby's insane. Title match against Brody King. Always chaos. You'll see stuff you've never seen before. You'll see Darby like get wrecked in new and wondrous ways. You wonder how the hell is he alive? And Brody, it's one of those things where it's like Brody may have lost, but he did not come out. It's one of those losses where you didn't lose anything. It's like you can lose and still not lose the aura. You're not buried. The whole term about being buried, it's like, it's what you do afterwards. If you notice in AEW, they tend to do, if it's new talent, they will let have them lose a couple times to make sure, see if they'll play ball, quote unquote. If they don't really complain as much, then they go with them. Which is kind of what they're doing with Roosh right now. They have Roosh doing squash matches now on Dynamite after months of not really using him, relegating him more to like Ring of Honor. And pardon me. It's interesting to see what they're going to do with Roosh in the future. They're setting up Andrade to face MJF, and Andrade's getting so over. It's almost like a 2-horse race for like most improved wrestler in 2026, or wrestler of the year in 2026 between MJF and Andrade. Because Andrade, since coming back, has found a character that works, and he's full on embraced it, and it looks like he's having fun doing it. If he's invested, willing to put the work in and do it, it's great, right? And it helps that MJF still has all these people like antagonize the hell out, and the ascension of Kevin Knight continues. They see a lot in Kevin Knight, and they're giving him reps. They're basically testing him to see if he's ready, if he's like main event worthy, especially putting him against Darby next week on Dynamite. I'm sure there might be interference in that match. If this is the WWE way, there would be interference in that match, and it would be one jealous MJF trying to get back his belt. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Or it could be, speedball. It's jet speed is still, it's still a thing for now. They could do the WWE trope. That's the thing. They try and stay away from WWE tropes. That's why the whole angle of of Mox getting kicked out of the Death Riders and sort of died. Because apparently, if you believe what you read, Mox didn't want to do like that angle because he considered it too WWE-ish. So if it does happen, it'll happen it'll happen a different way. And I think right now Mox is having a fun time of his life. You can see a little bit like the old Dean, the old smart ass Dean Ambrose coming out and with some of his delivery, right? And it's good. It's good. It gives it like a little bit of refresher for it. I'm sure, with a lot of things coming up in the future, because they have to do the build up for All In. The women might be in a holding pattern until Tony Storm comes back. But what they have right now is like the Brawling Birds and Divine Dominion is a good nucleus for a solid women's tag division. It'll be hard hitting. It'll be interesting to see where they go from there, because you got the Sisters of Sin. Look at Tekla's been a revelation too. You keep wondering, when is Athena coming to Dynamite? She just passed Bruno Sammartino for like second longest title reign ever. I don't know. I don't understand. I don't think people understand how long that was. She's been Ring of Honor Women's Champion for like 1,300 days. Yeah, it's been that long, right? And you wonder when they're going to when she's going to get the call up. It's like, do they? Because you keep harping that they're going to, Ring of Honor is actually going to get a TV deal. And I'll believe it when I see it. I think we shall see. I want to do something a little different here. I think rounding this thing off. It's like, I'm a bit of a metalhead. I know it's shocking, right? Look, full disclosure again, I have a semi-famous brother that I don't really talk about that much because he used to be, well, he still is. He's a bass player in a legendary in like progressive metal circles band. One of the like first wave bands, like often mentioned in the same breath as Queensryche and Crimson Glory and Dream Theater. It was a little band from San Diego called Psychotic Waltz. I've had like 5 albums out. I'm currently writing album number 6, but they're not touring anymore. They're just gonna be like a studio only band. And to that end, I've done like the metal journalism thing. I wrote for a fanzine like in the mid 80s. And I also wrote for a music industry magazine called Music Connection, where I would do record reviews and go to Sunset Strip like on a weekly basis and see really crappy bands and write scathing reviews about them. And no apologies on that, because some stuff I saw was back then was like, no, there's already a Guns N' Roses. No, there's already a Poison. I don't need to see 500 more of you guys. Oh, sorry. I'm going to recommend some of the crap I've been listening to lately, because I got an iPod. Actually on my phone, I got Spotify playlist of about a day and a half long of music. It's like 600, no, not 6, about 300 different bands. The thing about metal is there's so many subgenres involved. It's like, metal is basically, it's an umbrella. It's like it can cover everything. The differences are subtle. It's like the only difference between a power metal band and a death metal band is vocals. Really. It's like if you're singing, it's power metal. If you're grunting or screaming, it's death metal. And musicianship is pretty much the same. I've come to have like a discerning ear for stuff like that, and and if I want to recommend one, it's like go look for the new Corrosion of Conformity album. It's Good God, Bad Man. It's a double album, and the funny thing is they recorded the album at the same time that Pepper Keenan, who's the main man of Corrosion, is also recording a new Down album. And if you don't know who Down is an all-star band where it's like members of Pantera, Phil Anselmo, members of Crowbar, I Hate God, and and Corrosion. It's some, and the last time he did this, because it's not the first time Pepper's done this, he did the same thing when he recorded the Deliverance album the same time he recorded the first Down album, and they both came out, they both came out the same year, and they're both insane. And I recommend the new Corrosion of Conformity album highly. It's a little different than if you're going in expecting Wise Blood Part 2, no. It's more along the lines of In the Arms of God, mainly because Stanton Moore is drumming. Yeah, and Stanton Moore is like a really good drummer. My favorite song on that so far, I have to keep listening. It's called "Asleep on the Killing Floor." It's a total vibe. It's great when you got guys like my age that are still like rock, still bringing it. Because you can say one thing about certain bands that like outlet get too old to do their stuff. Certain bands like Scorpions are in their 60th year, for crying out loud. Klaus Meine is like 74, 73. Yeah. And still trying to hit like that, hit the high notes and stuff, and it's like doesn't really work out that way. You would think they would cater to their diminished like vocals. It's like some bands will tune down when they get older because the voice isn't the same. It's basically to compensate. But like I said, I recommend COC highly, and I also recommend that you check out the what we're doing on the TalkNShop Patreon. It's like it's about it starts about $8 a month, more or less. It's a good community, and we tend to again, a lot of ball busting. There's a lot of inside terms. Some of the humor might be a little sophomoric, but then again, I'm telling you, it's through an old man filter, right? There's a bit of like a generational gap on some stuff. I admit that. But everybody respects everybody there in the nest, and supports each other, and that this day and age that's really important, actually. I mean, it's usually people like at everybody's throats. It's good to have a community that has that's more or less nothing but positivity. Because they're all there to for the same reason. It's basically because they're fans of the Hoots, the Good Brothers. If you've never met Machine Gun and Gallows, they're great people. Well, it's funny that I say that because I've never met them in person. How they talk about parasocial relationships? It's sort of like that, but not as creepy. At least I think it's not as creepy. I think go ahead and end this. And it's like if you've made it through this far, congratulations. I'll be back next week. Supposedly they gave me a dedicated day to do this, to salt your eardrums. Well, of course, I'm the last to know, so we'll see what day this comes out. And until then, if it does come out, it's like, well, I'll see you next week then.
Thanks for listening to the $9 Podcast. Support the show by going to the $9 Podcast or going to patreon.com/TalkNShop to dive headlong into the insanity. See you next week.